This is Tom Duty, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Duty and a Google search from my site. For years, I've subscribed to conspiracy about 9/11, and I watched a BBC video that has changed my mind and allowed me to be more at peace with this tragedy. Common conspiracy points include there were no planes. Each crash site had very limited visual evidence of planes in the initial pictures. No tail, no wings, I heard say again and again. Where were the bodies? A very entertaining conspirator, a retired professor in Oregon, said of the whole at the Pentagon, a tiger is going to show up with his caddy, explaining how that tiny hole could not have accepted a full commercial plane. It's just not true. There's plenty of evidence of planes. BBC is one place that featured it, triggered me to hunt for more. And in many crash sites, many credible crash sites, many first-hand accounts, people walking through the crime scenes, describing the bodies, describing the plane parts. As far as no wings, wings are basically aluminum wrapped around fuel tanks, and it is no surprise that the wings, they don't vanish. The aluminum doesn't disintegrate, but it certainly would be unrecognizable, and that can be, I can accept that. Also, along with the no plane theory, is this idea that the planes were swapped with drones. It's ridiculous. They would have had to dispose of 4 planes and the people in it. It's a ridiculous notion. Possible. I understand the government, in credible sources, has practiced this before. It just didn't happen. The planes actually hit the targets, or each of the crash sites. The planes that are allegedly the planes that hit the targets are the planes that hit the targets. There was no swapping. Plenty of evidence that will support that. The forced calls to family, and it's a frame. This idea that somehow these people that made phone calls to family were forced to do it. You know, gun at head, call loved ones, say you're in a plane that's about to crash. And then those people would have all had to be disposed of. Killed and disposed of. In addition to that, there's a notion, a suggestion that the calls can't possibly be made from planes. And given the fact that there were probably hundreds of calls that were attempted and a handful of calls that went through in a relatively short order, there's also comments about the sound quality. These planes were at low altitude for a significant period of time. I find that evidence easy to set aside. Amateurs could not possibly have flown the planes like this. Well, let's consider that. Amateurs did have some flight training. The amateurs didn't take off, and they didn't land. They crashed all 4 of the planes. And they only hit arguably 2 of their targets, and maybe 3 if you consider the Pentagon a bullseye. But certainly learning how to fly a plane and hitting a tower would be relatively easy. You don't have to take off, you don't have to land. And all the pilots that say that it couldn't happen, that an amateur couldn't do it, is easy for me to set aside as pilot arrogance, bolstering their own skills, saying these amateurs could not possibly have done what our professionals do. What we do is difficult. No question, it's not an easy thing to do, but it is something humans do. Andrew Lubbock, who is the one who crashed the German wings into a Swiss mountain. This man was severely depressed. He was suicidal, and he had many successful takeoff and landings prior to crashing that plane. Humans fly planes. An amateur could have learned how to do it, especially since they don't have to take off and land, and they're hitting these towers that are almost 2,000 feet high. There's no evidence that ties the perpetrators to the planes. It's 100% false. Once BBC 10-year anniversary conspiracy video highlighted some of the features. I went looking for more. There's abundant evidence that ties the perpetrators to the crime. No plane, no wreckage, no body. That is an easy one. It's on my list here. I don't know. I think I covered it thoroughly a moment ago. The Pennsylvania plane was shot down, and there's wreckage found in the lake. BBC covers that thoroughly. The lake was only 2 miles away from the crash site, and the wreckage was not wreckage. It was basically small items, small material, the kind of thing that in a fire blows away from a fire, catches in the wind, and could easily have gone in a couple of miles with the wind favorably blowing in the direction of the lake, which on that day it was, according to BBC. Building 1 and 2 were a controlled demolition. Now, I have watched, I enjoy, aside from my conspiracy obsession, I enjoy watching these buildings blow up. There's one in China that especially is kind of funny. I don't think anyone was killed, but it's especially funny. It's an old concrete building. It blows up. You can see the charges, the smoke, and the building stays 100% intact and rolls down a hill. The entire building rolls down a hill without falling apart at all. So it was a relocation, not a demolition. But anyways, I watched them again and again, and I've watched plenty that the explosions certainly weren't. There was not enough evidence of controlled demolition explosions to convince me. Those puffs that Loose Change highlights coming out ahead of the falling building, that can easily be explained, and it is in the BBC video. And in addition to that, these large buildings are usually the explosions are in a couple of places up the tower, and once the tower begins to fall, it does fall in its own footprint. And given the design and comments from the designer, buildings 1 and 2 could certainly have fallen the way they did from the plane and the fire. There is World Trade Center 7. There was evidence of pre-knowledge that that building was coming down. I do not dispute that. John Kerry explains it. The owner of the building says we're going to pull it. Plenty of scenes of cops telling people to get away. This building is coming down. Plenty of interviews saying we were told this is it. There's just no disputing that. That building was prepped to come down. And was it a controlled demo? Of course it was. Now, how did those get set? And I can't reconcile that. But now I am at ease with, okay, our government's lying to us on this. It doesn't mean they perpetrated this horrific crime. A government perpetrated this horrific crime on its own people. World Trade Center 7, I concede, remains a mystery. I can't understand it, but it doesn't, for me, continue to reinforce the whole rest of the conspiracy as it did in the past. There's an inherent problem that favors conspiracy, and that is the government treated, for obvious reasons, that the perpetrators were dead. There's no reason to investigate, arrest, charge, prosecute, and imprison the perpetrators. They were already dead. So the government didn't have kind of what everyone seems to want, which is we want clear evidence of what happened. There was no trial. There is no reason to have a trial. And in addition to that, the government feels there is no reason to defend itself to the public, and there is no reason to put anyone on trial. Now, here's the irony of this whole thing. I find the conspirators entertaining, and I applaud them. I've already mentioned this retired professor in Oregon and Dylan of Loose Change. These people are true Americans in my mind. They leverage free speech. They leverage the internet. They're able to capture the attention. And especially the professor in Oregon, the retired professor. He was part of an organization for probably many years, probably multiple decades. He's paid by the organization who fills up the seats and puts an audience in front of him, and he gets to lecture about philosophy. And all of a sudden he's retired. He doesn't have an audience anymore. And you can tell he's hungry for it. He found it. He's got it. And we, as a nation, as individuals, need to think independently and decide what to do. But none of it is at the fault of the people who promote the conspiracy. It is in the masses that subscribe to them, like I has been one, and I'm now conceding I'm reversing on my opinion. And the other side is the people over and over again to even engage in conspiracies disrespectful to the dead. No, it's not. It's an obligation for each of us to try to reconcile 9/11. And one example of the conspiracies, there's a billion of them once you start seeing it from the flip side, as I jump from conspiracy subscriber to conspiracy disputer. There is one example of many. It's an hour, 50-minute video it's comparable to Loose Change in its thoroughness and presentation. And in one sentence, it's discrediting NIST in every way, discrediting and disrespecting NIST in their report. And in sentences later, in less than 60 seconds of video, the same voice disputes another piece of evidence referencing the same NIST report that was just discredited. So in one moment, the NIST report is discredited, and in the next moment, and literally within 60 seconds, it's used to dispute another point. So it's not credible in one moment and credible in the next. And that's exactly why conspirators were able to hook someone like me, keep my attention, and keep me troubled with this for a long period of time. And here I am at World Trade Center now in the Oculus, feeling much better about how I have come to rest with a terrible tragedy, September 11th, 2001. This has been Tom Duty, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Duty in a Google search from my site. Thank you for listening. Have a good day, good evening, or restful night's sleep. Ciao.